Shaanel, who is joining us as a guest expert. And she's going to be talking to us about low traffic, like testing or optimizing is more correct, optimizing for low traffic sites. And I think that's incredibly important because so many businesses don't have the capacity to A/B test. And I think too many times experts, and I wanted to say like experts, make optimization sound like it's all about A/B testing and there's nothing but A/B testing. So I am excited about this presentation today to give people the tools and to give you guys the tools to optimize without necessarily testing. And that's not a bad thing. So what do I want to say? I want to say, if you have questions, pop them in the chat over there on the right. Make sure to click on all panelists and attendees so everyone can see your answers and your chat. If you have a question for Shaanel while she's speaking, then simply ask it in the chat, or there's a Q&A section over there. If you're worried that we might miss it, then you can post it in there. And I think Shaanel's got like a 30-minute presentation for us, and then after that, we will take questions, and we'll also get into things about the masterclass if you have any questions about the modules or things that you're going through right now and you need questions. I'm happy to answer. Okay, listen, let me just close this and this. Okay, cool. So there's just so many things going on. Hi, Shaanel.
Hello.
Do you want to start by introducing yourself and like telling us a bit about who you are?
Yeah, so I'm Shaanel. I do content and growth at Shopify right now. I started out in internet marketing about 11 years ago now. When I was 15, I met an affiliate marketer who was just starting out, and it was like at the height of affiliate marketing, so it was very exciting. Like Facebook ads had just launched, so it was kind of like a land grab at the time. Yeah, so I worked with him for a few years, and then I was the director of marketing at a startup marketing agency. And then I moved on from that to work at CXL, which is where I learned most of the stuff that I'm going to be presenting today. And now I do content and growth at Shopify, as I
said. Awesome. Shaanel and I go back quite a bit, I would like to say, I think. So I can't remember, like the first time we met was like literally met was at Conversion Excel Live, right? Or was it before?
Yeah, it was at CTA conference in Vancouver.
There you go. We met there. To me, like I feel like I've known you for many years now. But I follow everything that Shaanel writes. And Shaanel's also written a few things for our blog, which have been really good. Emily, I don't know if you can see chat. So Emily says, "Nice to meet you, Shaanel. Heads up, half of your face is cut off."
There we go.
I didn't say anything because like maybe she prefers to look like that, but you're right, Emily. Good for mentioning it. Okay, so we're gonna let you start, share your screen, share your wisdom with us, and then we can move on. I'm going to turn off my video because sometimes it ruins the presentation. Okay, got it. Take it away.
Can you see my screen okay now with the way it is?
I can see the screen and I can see you.
Okay, awesome. Cool. So I'm going to talk about how to optimize low traffic sites. First, I'm going to cover what Talia touched on a little bit, what the difference between optimizing a high traffic site and a low traffic site even is, and then also how to conduct conversion research. Again, if you have any questions, I can't really see the Q&A screen, but maybe Talia can just jump in and let me know, or have me answer afterwards. And then also, if you're watching the recording, I'm always on Twitter, an annoying amount, so feel free to just send me a tweet. So the first thing to talk about is why you can't A/B test a low traffic site. Essentially, it's because you need to calculate your sample size upfront. So that sounds fancy, but just basically what it means is that you need to understand how many people your test needs to reach or include for it to be a valid result. So in this case, the sample size for the parameters that I've given is 13,533 visitors per variation, which is an important distinction. The per variation is an important distinction. So actually, it's really double what you're seeing in the calculator. I'm using Evan Miller's sample size calculator because I also hate math, like I feel like most of the population does. So it's very easy. You just kind of plug in your numbers and it spits out the sample size that you need. So for example, my baseline conversion rate is a very high 5%. That's basically whatever your conversion rate is right now for the page that you're testing. And then the minimum detectable effect is 15% in this case. What that means is I want to be able to detect a lift of 15% or more. So if it's under 15%, if I run a test and I see an 8% lift, I can't conclude, if I only reach the sample size below, that is a win. So basically, the smaller your minimum detectable effect, the bigger the sample size you need. So you can see here on the next slide, we moved the minimum detectable effect down to 8%, and the sample size jumped from 13,000 to 47,000, which, if you're running a standard A/B test, you have two variations, so it's really closer to 100,000 people included in your test. So you would be thinking, okay, well, I have 100,000 people who visit my site. I can run this test over a couple of months. The problem is, once you start running a test for too long, you run into something called sample pollution, which is a little bit more complicated than I want to get into right now. But essentially, the idea is, if you run a test for more than 2 to 4 weeks at a time, you're going to run into sample pollution, which again kind of distorts your results and makes them invalid. So essentially, you need to be able to reach this 47,000 per variation on the specific page that you're running the test. So it's not on your entire site, it's on one specific page within 2 weeks. And then it quickly becomes clear that you need to have quite a bit of traffic to run this type of A/B test. So that is why low traffic sites have trouble with A/B testing. And then like Talia said, a lot of people position A/B testing as kind of the be-all, end-all of conversion rate optimization, which it's not. There's a lot of other stuff that goes into optimizing your site. And just because you have a low traffic site doesn't mean you can't do conversion rate optimization. One of the main ways that you can get into optimizing your site without A/B testing is conversion research, which is actually something people do before the A/B test, and you can just do it without the A/B testing that comes afterwards. As I said, I used to work at CXL, so I'm partial to the Research Excel model, which might be familiar to you if you read Conversion Excel, and will become familiar to you after the presentation. Essentially, it's just a model of different types of research that you can conduct. So we're going to go through heuristic analysis, session replays, user testing, click maps, scroll maps, that sort of thing. But the first one that I always start with is heuristic analysis. And it kind of follows the model of done is better than perfect, because it's the most subjective and the least scientific of all of the different types of research that you can conduct. It's more or less your informed and regulated opinion, but often it's enough. So it's important to note with Star Wars, before you get into heuristic analysis, that the more experience you have with it, the better you're going to be at it. So somebody like Talia is going to be more accurate in her heuristic analysis than somebody who's just starting, because she's done it before, she knows what to look for. She's still not going to be perfect, but she's going to be much better than somebody who's just doing it for the first time. So one of the reasons that Talia in this fictional situation would be better at heuristic analysis than somebody who's just starting is because she would understand what to look for. So heuristic analysis is not so much about, I don't like that, or I don't think that will work. It's about auditing a site page by page, looking for a few key factors or elements, or even guidelines, I guess you could call them. And one of those is relevancy. So questions you would ask yourself: does the content meet user expectations? Does the design meet user expectations? And then how can I work towards matching those expectations even more? Clarity is another one. It's, in my opinion, the biggest one. And often, if I'm going through a site for clarity, it's the one that comes up the most often, which sounds a little counterintuitive, I guess, because everyone knows that you need to be clear. It's a basic fundamental principle that you should be clear on your landing pages on your site. But it's very, very difficult to be clear about something that you're so close to. It's hard to communicate that to people who know nothing about it when you know so much about it. So questions you would ask yourself: is the content clear? Is the value proposition clear? And how can I make it clear? Motivation is another big one. Unless somebody comes in with super high intent, you need to be the one motivating them towards taking the action you'd like them to take. So ask yourself, what's motivating people to take action? Is it clear and persuasive? How can we increase motivation even more? Friction is kind of like the opposite of motivation in that it takes away from them wanting to take the next step. And so you're kind of auditing for things that are causing doubts or uncertainties, what's making the act of taking the next step more difficult, and how can you simplify the process? And then distraction is another important and common one to look for. What's taking away from the most wanted action that you have? So it's very common for you to arrive on a site and there'll be competing calls to action, which is fine. You don't have to have only one desire for each page, but you do need to have one most important desire for each page. So one action you'd like them to take, definitely. Maybe you also want them to share it, or maybe you want them to read more. But you need to visually prioritize one thing, because everything else is taking away from that. So make sure you know your one thing, and then figure out what's not helping the user take that action and what's drawing attention away from it. And is it really necessary? Because I think you'll find there are a lot of things taking attention away from it, and a lot of them are not necessary. Heuristic analysis is done best in a group. So you're going to miss things as you're going through. I'm going to miss things. Tyler's going to miss things. Everyone will miss something. So it's best to do it in a group of like 3 to 5 people, all following the same guidelines and then coming together to share what they've learned. And again, since you're doing it page by page, it's really easy to organize. Everyone come in and share what they found on that page and this page and so on. Of course, this is probably the most important part of heuristic analysis, is that you need to verify. Again, it's very subjective, and you're making it a little bit more objective with the guidelines, but it's still very subjective. And you can kind of think of heuristic analysis as your guiding light almost, as you're moving towards the rest of the conversion research. So it's kind of setting you up to ask the right questions as you're going through the rest of the research and guide you in the right direction as you're going through the rest of the research. So trust or verify, basically. Then you get into something called technical analysis, which is my favorite part of conversion research. Essentially, the first one is cross-browser testing, which just means that you're going through your site and making sure that it shows up well in every browser and it works well. So it looks nice and also it works well. There are a lot of tools you can use to do this, but they can be expensive and it can take a long time to go through every browser and every version of every browser. So I recommend kind of prioritizing through Google Analytics. And I'm going to start showing quite a few screenshots of analytics, and they're all from Google Analytics. So I know that there are other types of analytics tools, but it's probably the most common and most accessible, so that's what I'm using. So essentially you can go to audience, technology, and then browser and OS, and you'll find this report. And I always switch to, and I do this consistently throughout the presentation, I switch from the data view in the right-hand column to the comparison view, so that it shows me whatever metric I'm looking at, in this case bounce rate, compared to the site average. I'm using bounce rate, but I really recommend that you look closer to revenue. So maybe it's a specific conversion point or it's revenue generated. It'd be much better. Bounce rate is kind of an iffy engagement metric, but it was there for the sake of example. So important to note is that you don't want to look at browsers separate from one another. You want to look within the same browser family. So Opera being slower or reduced from the site average compared to, say, Firefox is not really helpful to me. What is helpful to me is if I were to click through and see the different browser versions and see how those compare to one another. You always have to compare within the same browser family. And then once we get into cross-device testing, you'll see the same thing. We want to compare within the same device family. So cross-device testing is the same thing. You want to make sure that your site looks good and works well on any device. And this is still important. I feel like a lot of people will, if I'm talking about this, will push back and say, okay, well, it's 2018. Everyone's using the latest of everything, and it's untrue. It's very untrue. There's always some guy or girl who's using like a super old browser, one that you've never even heard of, or a really old phone. Like somebody somewhere is using a Motorola Razr. I just know it. So when you're doing cross-device testing, you can also find this in Google Analytics. You just go to Audience, Mobile, and Devices. And then again, I've switched. You can't see the headers for this one, but in the right column, I've switched from the data view to the comparison view, so I can compare it to the site average. And again, it's not interesting to me that Google Nexus 6P performs better than the Samsung SMB312E. That's not interesting to me. What's interesting to me is that that particular Samsung model performs worse than the other Samsung models. So that would be a place that you would start looking into as maybe something is broken, something doesn't look well, and kind of like you'd star it or write it down in a notebook as a place to check that too when we do web analytics analysis. And then this is my slide for the importance of mobile. The context for people using mobile is very, very different than people who are using desktop. As I'm going through any sort of cross-browser, cross-device testing, and a lot of other forms of conversion research, I guess, to be fair, but especially cross-browser, cross-device, I'm separating mobile and desktop. I'm not comparing desktop users to mobile users. I'm only comparing mobile to mobile and desktop to desktop. And then the last element of technical analysis is speed analysis. So you want to make sure your site is loading quickly. I think that's a given. We read about it time and time again that fast sites perform better, they convert better. A distinction that not a lot of people talk about is that you're looking at page interactive time more so than your page load time. So your page load time is kind of instinctually the one you would look at just based on the name, but it's actually seconds until every single element on the page is done loading, which actually isn't something you're too concerned about. You're concerned about how many seconds until the site is usable for your visitors, which is page interactive time. So anything under 3 seconds, you're pretty good in terms of speed. 4 to 7 seconds, you could definitely use some improvement, but it's not like a red flag, fix this immediately. Anything over 7 seconds, I would definitely spend a significant amount of time, consult a developer on how to fix your page load time. A good way to kind of, again, go through and just star some priority pages is through the site speed report in Google Analytics. So it's just behavior, site speed, page timings. And again, I've switched to the comparison view, and you'll notice that the metric is document interactive time and not page load time. So basically, what you end up with is a list of pages that are slower than others when they're loading. And then what you do is put those into the Page Speed Insights tool, and it'll basically give you a list of reasons why those sites or why those pages might be loading slowly. To fix them, you're probably going to want to go through a developer, as I mentioned. I definitely would. I'm not technical enough to fix something like that, but at least you can kind of come to them with a list of pages that they should definitely check out and also some possible reasons for the slowness. Now we get into web analytics analysis, which is probably my second favorite type of conversion research. A lot of people have analytics, and like almost everyone has Google Analytics. Almost everyone checks Google Analytics and views like some key metrics and then reports on it. But not a lot of people actually use Google Analytics the way that it's intended to be used, or any analytics tool. They're not segmenting, they're not digging deeper. So hopefully these next few slides will help change that. The first thing you want to start out with is a list of questions, which you maybe took from your heuristic analysis. Maybe you're just thinking about them and you're wondering about them. If you kind of just, like, Google Analytics is super deep tool, a super complex tool when you get right down to it and you drill all the way down. So you can easily get lost looking for something you don't know. It's very easy to get sidetracked. It's very easy to miss things when you don't know what you're looking for. So I always suggest that people start with a list of questions and then use Google Analytics and dig through it to try to find answers to those specific questions. And as you're going through, you might have a lucky day and some things might come up that you weren't even thinking about, but it's definitely going to help if you have something to guide you. Before you do that, though, you want to dig in and figure out if everything is being tracked correctly. Again, this is one of those things kind of like Larry that just sounds obvious, and everyone thinks that, you know, they're good on that front, but a lot of people aren't. I would say probably in the last year or so, like anywhere from 40 to 50% of the Google Analytics setups that I've seen and used have been tracking things improperly. So it is a big problem, even among bigger companies. So definitely check it out for yourself. You want to know if you're collecting all the data you need. You want to know if you can trust that data. And then you want to know if anything is broken or tracking incorrectly. Some common mistakes, pages are missing from your Google Analytics reports. If this is the case, you're probably just missing the snippet on the pages that are missing. If you have a big site, probably the easiest way to go through and audit it instead of doing it manually would be to use a checker. You can find them online, just through Google. And they basically like crawl your site to make sure you have the snippet on all of the pages. And if you don't, it'll leave you with a list of pages that are missing snippets so you can add them in. Also, data is different in the shopping cart tool. This is a really, really common one. If people use a separate shopping cart tool and they're building their site on, say, like WordPress, essentially the data can be different for a number of reasons. The biggest one probably is just the time zones. Maybe your shopping cart tool is in one time zone and your Google Analytics is in another time zone. That can create discrepancies in the data. And then also, if you installed your shopping cart tool in the middle of the day, that can create problems. And a lot of shopping cart tools don't actually record cancellations properly. So you may be seeing them as revenue generated in your shopping cart tool, but in your Google Analytics, you're seeing a lower number because people canceled and you had to issue a refund. And then the last common one is cross-domain tracking. A lot of people don't set this up, and it's a particularly big problem, again, in e-commerce, just because a lot of people do have that external shopping cart tool, which means you're working with two different domains, and if those domains aren't communicating with each other through cookies, then you're going to have, again, discrepancies in your data. So there's like a million points that your Google Analytics can go wrong, but these are three of the most common ones that I've seen, especially in e-commerce. So when I'm analyzing a site through web analytics, I usually start with the highest value pages. And to me, that's your high volume, low value pages. So for example, an old blog post that does really, really well, but it doesn't bring in any leads. It doesn't bring in any sales. And then your low volume, high value pages. So that would be like your checkout page. Not a lot of people get there, but when they do, you have a high conversion rate. The best way that I found to do that is to go into your pages, and then again I compare to site average, and I look at the bounce rate. Again, that's just an example. You should be looking at like your goals or your conversion points, or even better, your revenue. And then you'll notice that I have an advanced filter on. It's a really, really simple filter. It's just filtering out anything with less than 1,000 page views, because it's like going back to what we were talking about in the beginning about sample size. It's just too small of a sample size to be included, so I just filter it out. 404. So 404s, everyone knows that they're bad. They're not good. They're bad for UX, but they're also bad for SEO. So it's really important that you go in and you fix them as soon as you know about them. The problem is not a lot of people go in to see what is causing a 404 error on their site. The easiest way that I found to do that is to go into your pages and again, just search for whatever you've called your 404 page. So in this case, it's a page not found. I search for that, and I clicked through to it, and I essentially looked at it from the referring destination, and it gives you a list of all of the places that are referring to your broken links. So you can go through one by one, and if they're internal links, you can fix them. If they're external links, you can reach out to those people and tell them, hey, this is moved, or we have a new resource or something that you can link to. And just fixing this, it will be a huge boost to your conversion rate over time, especially because you're going to get the secondary benefit of Google referring traffic to those sites again, or to those pages again, and people not thinking that you're just full of broken links. Then I start to look at the funnel. So this is the funnel view. And essentially, you want to know where people are dropping out of your funnel. If they're dropping out on the payment page, or if they're dropping out on the billing page, and then you can use the conversion research to figure out why. But you can't really figure out where to start if you don't know where it's happening. You can't explain it if you don't know where it's happening. So this is a really easy way to just visually see where people are dropping out. It makes sense when you're looking at it for more people to be dropping out at the top. And as you're going through, hopefully that drop-off rate is getting smaller and smaller. And then just when you're thinking about optimizing those pages, the further down the funnel you get, the smaller the necessary impact. So if I ran an experiment on review order page and I was able to increase the conversion rate by, say, 0.5%, it would make a huge difference because not a lot of people are dropping off. It's a high converting page. But if I were to optimize the billing page where the drop off is slightly larger, you can see how a 0.5% increase wouldn't be as significant. You also have the goal flow report, which I would argue is more helpful. It's more accurate, and you also can apply segments to it, and you can also do date comparison, which is very helpful. So it's a little bit more flexible as well. I recommend checking that out, using it the same way you would use just the basic funnel report, but kind of relying on this more as your point of accuracy. And you'll see, like, what's cool about it is that it doesn't just show it in a linear fashion, because often the linear funnel is a myth. Not many people just convert in a linear way anymore. It's very much like a tornado almost of people coming in and out and going back up and coming back down. So this is a little bit more accurate in that sense as well. You also have your reverse goal path report, which I really, really like because, again, it's more of like a tornado than a linear line of conversion. And what you can do is you can start with your goal completion location. So in this case, it's about us / contact us. Thank you. So presumably people contacted you and that was your goal. And then you can see the 3 previous steps people took to get to that point. And I like this a lot because you can see funnels that you didn't even know existed because people aren't converting every single time the way that you think that they are. And you can see here that there's a lot of differences, except for step 1, which kind of has to be the contact page. You can see how the different ways that they arrived at that goal completion. Internal search is also an interesting way to look at your Google Analytics. It's a report of its own, and you can go in and you can see what people are searching for in the left-hand side of the search term, and then you can also see how many people are searching for that specific term, and then you can pick your metric. I'm doing the comparative site average again, and I'm doing time after search because I'm interested in how well my content is serving those search terms. So if the time after search is better than the site average, that means that those people probably found what they were looking for, and I have enough interesting content on that topic. And if it's lower than the site average, or at least significantly lower than the site average, I know that those people probably didn't find what they were looking for, and they probably left frustrated. So it kind of helps with even just a content strategy, whether it's a blog or whether it's a content page, for what kind of content you should create, and ensure that the people who are searching are finding what they're looking for. Because you'll usually find the people who search on your site are more engaged and higher value visitors than people who don't. So you want to at least make sure that you're giving those high value people what they're looking for and they're not leaving right after they search. But above all, you want to make sure that you are segmenting. So I always use like Smarties as an example. It's easy and everyone knows you should eat the red ones last. So when you're segmenting out the Smarties in your pack by color and you're leaving the red ones for last, you are basically doing web analytics segmentation. When you apply to Google Analytics, you get specific answers for what specific groups of people are doing, which is a lot more informative and a lot more valuable than what people are doing in aggregate. So this kind of gets into like advanced filters and advanced segments, and there's a ton of resources that I can link you guys to. Some of that I've written, some that I haven't written. So there's a lot of information on it, and I really recommend once you kind of get comfortable with web analytics analysis that you dive into segmentation to go even deeper. So that was it for the web analytics analysis. Now we get into kind of click maps and scroll maps and other sort of more qualitative types of conversion research. So for click maps, they're not as valuable as they look. They look really nice in presentations. They look really nice to like executive boards, but really the biggest value that you're going to get from them is seeing when people are clicking on things that are not links, which can be really useful if people, it's a good signal that people want more information on that, or they assume that it should be linked, which can help you again with your content strategy. But a lot of this information is available in Google Analytics in the navigation summary. So don't immediately assume that you need to buy like a separate tool for click maps. You can usually find the information right in Google Analytics. Scroll maps are a little more helpful. They can help you better prioritize your content and messaging. And then any sort of like drastic color change that you see as you're looking in the scroll map means you need visual cues or might indicate a false bottom. So what that means is as you're going through, you can see how far people are scrolling. So you know if your most important information is midway through and you know people aren't making it there, you might want to reconsider how your messaging is prioritized, right? You might want to move it up. And then for drastic color changes, if you're getting a lot of people scrolling down and then all of a sudden it stops, it could be that they think it's the end of the page. It's called a false bottom. It's very, very common, especially in the SaaS industry. And then it could also just mean people aren't interested in it. So again, it could help you with prioritizing your content and messaging. Session replays are my favorite. I feel like I'm saying that a lot, but they are really, really fun. I know when I was at CXL and I first reviewed session replays, Tech, who was founder at CXL, told me that after the first 100, I would be sick of them and I would never want to do them again. But I've done them many, many times since then. I've looked at many hundreds of session replays, and it's just super fun. It's super fun to watch real people with real money navigating your site and seeing like where they pause and where they give up and where they're getting frustrated and where they're going back. And like, I've sat and watched people go back and forth, trying to find the information, and it often leads to really easy, obvious UX changes that you can make. But it can also be used just to gather more insight on poor performing pages, especially. Form analytics are super easy. Usually it's just a matter of installing a form analytics tool of some sort. Basically, it allows you to look at what fields cause error messages, where people hesitate to fill out, probably the phone number field. A lot of people probably hesitate there. Which people leave empty, either they're required. It's really helpful for info products. It's really helpful for lead gen, but it can also be helpful for e-commerce. It can be helpful for every industry. On-site surveys. So that kind of breaks down to exit surveys and then on-page surveys. So an exit survey is if somebody is exiting your site, just as they're showing exit intent, a pop-up shows up and asks them to fill out a short survey, so like a 1 to 2 question survey. And an on-page survey is the same thing, except it shows up when they're still actively engaging with your site. So for an on-site survey, you're focused on actionable data and kind of getting at the friction that they're experiencing, because they're not your customers, right? They're just your visitors. So you want to understand what's holding them back and what's causing them frustration. These are some examples. of questions that you can ask. What was the purpose of your visit? Were you able to complete your task? Is anything holding you back? But more or less, as long as you're focusing on the friction, you can ask any question you want. You basically want to stick to either one open-ended question or a yes/no question, then an explanation post-answer. People don't have a lot of time. They probably don't want to be filling out your on-site survey, especially because they don't have any sort of relationship with you or your brand. They want to be here for the first time. It's just not a high priority for them to help you. So it's best to ask one question or do the foot in the door method of asking them a simple yes/no question. And then once they've done that favor, follow up with another favor of a open-ended question. Customer surveys are more in-depth surveys for people who have actually purchased from you. I try to focus on first-time buyers who don't have a previous relationship with you. So they don't really know you, they don't really know your brand. It's probably the first time they've heard of you, but they still purchase from you. And try to get that survey to them as quickly as possible after they've received the product. Because time distorts memory, time distorts opinions. So it's best to just do it as soon as you believe they have received the product. And I try to get about 200 responses. It's not detrimental to get more responses, but it will take you a lot of time because hopefully you're asking open-ended questions. So you either need to read through them all and codify them to kind of get more quantitative results, or you need to read through every single one. It's very, very time consuming. But then under 200 responses, you might not be able to see the trends that start to develop. So I think 200 is kind of like a good rule of thumb number to follow. Again, here's just some questions that you could consider asking. You can really ask for any information that you think would be useful to you. But these are general questions that would be relevant to most companies. So why did you choose us over the competition? What problem does our product solve for you? What do you like about it most? Did you consider alternatives? What was your biggest fear or concern about us? Essentially, you're looking for anything that is going to help you convert the next person. And then last but not least, we get to user testing. So user testing is very, very humbling. As much as you want people on their bikes to use those little gates to go around, everyone is just going to go on the grass and they're going to ruin your lawn. So it's just best to do the testing and to understand how people really use your site, how people really use your product, instead of making assumptions and enforcing your gates upon people who just want to ride it from the pool. The best way I find to get to insights is to ask them to perform a specific task, a broad task, and then a funnel completion. So for a specific task, you might ask them to find a Nintendo Switch game between $40 and $50 that they would like to play. And then for a broad task, you might just ask them to find a video game that they would want to play. And then for the funnel completion, you would ask them to go through the actual funnel all the way to purchase. And as they're doing all of these things, you want to make sure that they are narrating what they're doing and what they're thinking as much as possible. And you want to listen. Give them the tasks and just listen to what they're saying. It often makes for a pretty awkward conversation. I just did a whole bunch of user testing recently for a blog, and the people, they want you to kind of guide them when they get stuck, but it's the most helpful when they are stuck. So you want to make sure you're listening and not guiding them and kind of just letting them figure it out on their own. And the more you interject and the more information you give them beyond the specific tasks, the more diluted their answers are going to be. So despite the social pressure to talk and fill those silences, you definitely want to let them happen and listen to what they're saying as they're going through. And that's it. So again, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now or later on Twitter.
That was really cool. I wrote down a ton of stuff that I wanted to say throughout. So I was just laughing here, and also my dog was barking. Most of you probably heard that. I wanted to say about user testing, by the way, that is definitely it's becoming one of my favorite ways to really better understand where problems come up. One of the things that can do to actually eliminate that weird call that you were saying before that it gets kind of weird is just asking them to do it by themselves, but just record themselves and send it through. The one problem with user testing that I find is that people know that they're being tested, so they're more likely to try and sound in a certain way or do certain things or be smarter than what they are or whatever it is in order to just like make an impression. So user testing can never work in a silo. It always has to be accompanied with so many other things. And then the other thing that came up to me was when you were talking about customer surveys, you mentioned the fact that, you know, it needs to be done as soon as possible for people who are customers. And one of the things, and I advocate for this all the time, so most of you probably heard me say this, is do your customer surveys on your thank you page. Instead of sending people to their inbox to check their email, you can actually just tell them to just answer a question on the actual page. It works so well, and I've seen it work amazingly well for my clients and for myself. So I definitely recommend doing that. Yeah, I mean, this was so insightful. I think one of the biggest issues with kind of optimizing is that you first have to find the leak in the funnel. Like, you have to find the problem, right? And I think you've given us like a ton of different ways to just figure out where the problem might be. Oh, we have a question from, I think it's Steve, that I can't see for some reason. Yes, it's Steve. When it comes to testing, we're often told to just test one element at a time. Do you recommend this also?
I think it really depends. I mean, as like in general, yes, I would say test one thing at a time. But if you've reached like a point in which you're feeling like minor changes to your site aren't causing a big change, you might want to consider like a full redesign and testing a full redesign. But in general, especially if you're kind of just starting with testing, I would recommend one thing at a time, or at least one hypothesis at a time, which I think some people don't think about. You might be changing multiple things, but you're testing one fundamental concept or one fundamental idea.
Yeah, I was definitely going to say that I am kind of against testing like separate elements on a page, because I feel like you're not really going to get the uplifts that you want. And at the end of the day, you're not really going to learn anything from it. So even if you change the color of a button or a headline, that's great, but you're not going to like really learn from the insights from that and then be able to test other stuff. So I am very pro like testing one hypothesis at the time. And if you're testing a hypothesis, it's easier to then drill down and say, okay, now let's test different elements on the page and see what part here can be optimized even further. Mm-hmm. Emily says, this is maybe a question more for Talia than Chanel. If our site has too little traffic to do a proper A/B test and the web builder tool for my small business doesn't allow A/B testing, should we use the emotional frameworks to create one version to run for 2 weeks and then afterwards run the second version for 2 weeks? Then would we just compare them side by side historically and with heuristic analysis? I am kind of, and I'm actually interested in what Chanel has to say with this, because I am kind of against testing one thing in a period of time versus the other. Simply because it's different times, it's different days, it's different impacts. Chanel started talking before about sample pollution. Part of the thing that happens with sample pollution is like when different things occur during that time, it's enough to have, you know, something in the news, or there's a holiday, or it's a weekend, or whatever it is that kind of suddenly gets in the way. So it is very hard to actually test something, you know, one thing for 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then go ahead and test something else. If you don't have the option to A/B test, I am more pro to testing just one, letting it run for a substantial amount of time, because again, you're not going to be running this for 3 weeks to see results. You want to run it for a much longer period of time, because you're not really sending people, you're not really doing an A/B test, which is 50-50. You are just doing a complete redesign, or you're redesigning a certain part of the page. So I would run it for a substantial amount of time and then over time look at the results and compare it to the old website or the old design. But it does really depend on the amount of traffic and the amount of conversions that you have. Chanel, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I very much agree. There's too many, for me, external factors that could affect those 2-week periods differently. So I either would argue that you should run it at the same time, or you should run one test and compare it to your historic. So not directly the previous period, but historically over a long period of time. How has it performed compared to the changes you made?
Yeah, I totally agree. And if you're asking specifically about the emotional frameworks, Emily, then there are a few options in the masterclass. So you have the before and after effect, how people are feeling right now, how they want to feel, so before and desired, and then you also have the us versus the competitors. I would choose one of them to test, and if you're doing like the before and after, then going by the customer surveys that you're doing, going by the interviews that you're doing, talking to the team, you should be able to see a pattern of what would work better. Are people more impacted by what they want to feel and the promise of a better solution, or is it something that they need to see that you understand them right now, feel their pain? And you can run that specific test for, as Chanel was saying and I was saying before, for a substantial amount of time, 2, even 3 months, to just see how that impacts results, and then later on go back and see historically how that works. And you can always then come up with a new variation and test that. But I would use the data and the research that you're doing right now in the masterclass in order to make a educated guess what would be the optimal test for you. That's what I would put my stuff on. That's what I would test. That's how I do it. Does that make sense? Emily, any follow-up questions? Maybe? Thanks. Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. Cool. So Chanel, when you're doing like stuff right now for Shopify and you're doing growth for them, are you specifically focusing on writing articles, or are you also doing all the growth around that?
So I'm writing, but I'm also doing growth specifically related to content. So I'm not doing growth for like the product, I'm doing growth for the blog itself as like an acquisition channel.
How is that?
Which I think is,
like
I think it's
in terms of,
yeah, I think it's really interesting focusing on just one aspect of the site, because not a lot of people kind of get that opportunity, especially me. Like, I've worked for a lot of small companies, and there's no way that there's been enough time for one person to just dive deep onto a blog, despite the fact that it's often like one of the biggest drivers of traffic. So it's been really cool for me to dig into it, and I've actually applied all of this research to multiple blogs that Shopify has, and kind of trying to turn what I think most people see as a acquisition channel that doesn't convert into something that does convert. So, and it's cool being able to see all of these principles that you learned about for like testing your entire site applied to just one element, and seeing how, it can be applied to your site, it can be applied to your marketing strategies, it can be applied to just about any channel, which is cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Ollie Gardner just did this entire research on how, the blog, the unbalanced blog, which is the biggest driver of traffic, does not convert, which is an insane thing to A, find out, and B, actually only find out now, like 7 years into the business. But the fact that, so many people put a lot of emphasis on content for SEO reasons, for driving traffic, and the blog doesn't convert. Like, for me, the blog is probably the biggest conversion driver of my business, and email marketing, obviously, hands down, but it's part of it. It's like one funnel. So I'm always interested in seeing, like, what are people doing in order to convert their content? So is it specific things that you're putting in the content, or are you working also on the design around the content on Shopify, like the actual banners on the side or pop-ups and stuff like that? How does it work?
Yeah, for the most part right now, I'm focusing on like inline funnels that are being built, so what's usually called content upgrades, for example. Right now, if you were to sign up for a content upgrade for Shopify, you would just be entered into the RSS. So there's a lot of opportunity there to build out actual funnels, and then for your top performing content, you can also build custom funnels. I think that I think a lot of people are very resigned to the idea that blogs are traffic acquisition and they're not conversion tools. And it's not something that I agree with. I think that if you apply the same attention and the same amount of detail and rigor to your blog as you do the rest of your site, then you can turn it into a high converting channel.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's just a very interesting channel that so many people are saying it doesn't convert, and I think it's just the fact that people aren't doing it correctly, which is fine. We need to learn how to do it. Wahida wanted to know, what is the website? It's Unbounce. I have the link somewhere, so I'll post it in our group later on so you can see it. It's a really interesting project that he did. He wrote 20 blog posts in 30 days, which is insane. Maybe not for Chanel, it's a ton of blog posts, but that's really crazy. And they were just monitoring to see if it's actually driving conversions to their new tool, and it wasn't. So obviously there's like a ton of knowledge that he's gained from this whole project and how to actually optimize the blog, and now they've kind of completely changed the whole strategy of the Unbound blog. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. So Chanel, where can people find you if they want to ask you questions or connect with you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, so at Chanel_Mullen, because somebody has Chanel Mullen and they're banned. It's really ruining things for me. But yeah, Chanel_Mullen, and then I'm also Chanel.Mullen at Shopify.com if you want to send me an email.
Awesome. Thank you so much for everything. I'm sure we'll have some follow-up questions and people will reach out to you. But thank you so much for your time today. I think we're going to continue with a few more questions for the masterclass. But yeah, this was fantastic. It was everything that I was hoping it would be. And I will also, guys, post the link to the article that Chanel wrote, because it's very in-depth, exactly how to test and to optimize low traffic sites.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you.